I'm sorry for the mess. I can't offer much, but please take your time. Barbara, struggling with her poor health and barely able to move, dragged herself to give me a cup of tea in a dirty glass. Feeling so sorry for her, I quickly cleaned up and made some rice balls for her. With tears in her eyes, she said, "This is like a dream. Homemade food is so delicious." It's a child's duty to grow up, get bigger, and save for the future. Yet Barbara was wearing clothes that looked like they could tear any moment. Her hair was full of dandruff, and it was clear she hadn't bathed properly. This kind of situation should never be allowed. My eldest son's wife, and he must face proper consequences for neglecting her. Determined, I began thinking of ways to rescue Barbara and punish my son and his wife. My name is Maria Moore, a 70-year-old housewife. After my husband passed away, I've been living alone. My husband and I had one son, and my eldest son Daniel is married and has his own family. Fortunately, their home is not too far from mine, about a 30-minute drive. They have a daughter, Barbara, but it had been almost a year since I last saw her. "Hey, could you let me see Barbara, just for a little while?" I finally asked one day when Daniel and his wife Jennifer came to visit. I've asked my eldest son and his wife many times to let me see Barbara, but they always stubbornly say, "Barbara doesn't want to see you." "I've told you before, Mom, Barbara doesn't want to see you. I think she feels uncomfortable around you," Daniel said, turning away. I glanced at Jennifer, who gave a wry smile and said, "Barbara is at a difficult age. She's got a lot on her mind. I'm sure she'll want to see you when she settles down. Please be patient." This conversation had been repeated many times. Normally, I would back down at this point, saying, "Well, I suppose there's no helping it then." But that day, I couldn't hold back any longer. I retorted sharply. "You've been saying that for a year now. I miss my granddaughter so much. Just 30 minutes would be enough. I just want to see her face, say hello, and give her some spending money." "I told you, no is no. Barbara doesn't want to see you. Even 30 minutes is too much for her. It's a parent's natural feeling to not want to force their child," Daniel said, scowling. Jennifer nodded in agreement, saying, "That's right." But I still couldn't accept their reasoning. I argued further, saying she can't bear even 30 minutes is a problem in itself, isn't it? She'll be in high school next year. Right, if she's going to school, she'll naturally have to interact with others. Not everyone will be easy to deal with. Right, how does she manage? Don't tell me you're not making her endure anything. My frustration with their unreasonable attitude over the past year had turned into great irritation. Unconsciously, my tone became severe, even surprising myself. Daniel's face twisted in anger as he yelled at me. "Stop meddling in our family. We're doing our best. You have no right to complain when you're not involved. I've always thought you were a hassle." "I'm sorry, Daniel, but I haven't seen Barbara for over a year. How can you expect me to just accept that and not feel anything? I can't handle it." "I don't care about your feelings right now. If you're going to threaten our way of life, then you're not part of our family." Daniel's words hit me hard. Hearing my son, whom I had raised with so much care for years, say I wasn't family, made my heart ache terribly. "Please, Daniel, don't say such cruel things. I was wrong. I'm sorry." I couldn't bear the harsh words and started to cry, but Daniel's irritation didn't seem to subside. "I've hated this about you for a long time, Mom. I should have cut ties with you sooner." Those words shattered my heart. Even though I was already hurting, Jennifer stepped forward to support Daniel's words. "I've always thought you were too meddlesome, mother-in-law." I widened my eyes in shock. I never intended to be overbearing. I just wanted to care for my son's family as a mother and grandmother. Seeing that I couldn't respond, Jennifer sighed deeply, as if exasperated, and continued with more heartless words. "Sorry, but we need to distance ourselves from you for a while." "What?" Those words made me feel dizzy. "I've noticed your attitude for a long time, mother-in-law. But it's gotten so bad that I can't ignore it anymore. Even Daniel, your own son, is so stressed out. We need some distance. I understand what you're saying, but what about my feelings? You know, Jennifer, I've been living alone since my husband passed away. If even my own family cuts ties with me, I'll be..." Before I could finish, Jennifer sighed deeply and gave me a cold stare. "Isn't that a bit selfish? If you hadn't acted this way, Daniel and I wouldn't have to make this decision. You're too old to be throwing tantrums. This is final." With that, Jennifer got up and started gathering her things. Seeing this, Daniel also stood up and said, "We're leaving." Before walking out, "Please wait." I called after them several times, but my eldest son and his wife didn't listen. So, I was left all alone, truly isolated from my only family. Then one day, a friend who happened to be passing near Daniel's house contacted me. They said that when they passed by, there was an unbearable stench coming from my son's house. Worried, I went to check it out. Indeed, the smell coming from the house was overwhelming. Feeling uneasy, I used the spare key I had to open the door, despite knowing it wasn't right. I rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. I had no choice but to enter. The smell was even worse inside. Pinching my nose, I called out, "Is anyone here?" From deep inside the house, I heard a faint voice. Enduring the stench, I moved in that direction and saw a thin blanket bulging. When I pulled it back, I found Barbara, emaciated, reeking, and severely weakened. "I'm sorry for the mess. I can't offer much, but please take your time," Barbara said as she dragged herself out from under the blanket. She staggered to what seemed to be the kitchen, poured tea into a dirty cup, and brought it to me. According to Barbara, my son and his wife had gone on an overseas trip. Barbara had caught a cold, and they left her behind to avoid bringing any virus abroad. They hadn't returned for 3 months, and Barbara had been surviving on her saved-up allowance. But with school and household chores piling up, the house became increasingly filthy. Naturally, a child's allowance couldn't last 3 months alone, and she had to cut back on food expenses, depleting her strength. She had been bedridden ever since. I quickly cleaned up the house and made rice balls with the little usable rice I found. When Barbara tasted them, she said, "This is like a dream. Homemade food is so delicious," with a tear rolling down her cheek. Those words clearly indicated how my son and his wife had been treating her. Unable to accept the reality, my voice filled with anger, making Barbara feel dejected and say, "I'm sorry. This is unacceptable. It's unthinkable for a girl to be left alone in such an environment. I'm sure the reason my eldest son and..." His wife was so adamant about not letting me see Barbara was because they knew their treatment of her would be exposed. They knew they were doing something wrong, yet they didn't try to correct it. Instead, they neglected Barbara and let her situation deteriorate. Anyone with a normal mindset would have sought help, taken measures, or tightened their own efforts to prevent this from happening. By not doing any of this, and hiding Barbara as if covering up a foul smell, my son and his wife have done something unforgivable. They deserve severe consequences. With that resolve, I began to plan my revenge right then and there. Of course, I intended to involve Barbara. After all, she is the primary victim in this situation. When I explained the plan to her, she looked at me with sparkling eyes and said, "Grandma, you're amazing." It seemed that in Barbara's mind, her parents were already like strangers, and she didn't hold any special feelings for them. If that's the case, no one would object if we thoroughly disgraced them. I must drag them down to the depths of hell, where they can never see the sunlight again, making them thoroughly regret the sins they've committed. This is my final lesson as a mother and mother-in-law. I felt responsible for allowing my imperfect son to leave home and build a family. Thus, I believed it was my duty to set things right. 3 days later, just as Barbara had said, my son and his wife returned from their trip. As planned, Barbara and I were cleaning their house while waiting for their return.
"We're home,"
I heard Daniel call as he entered the house. Jennifer followed, laughing mockingly. I wonder if she's still alive. As if ridiculing Barbara. Their attitude was unbelievable, but I held my tongue for now. Treating Barbara as if she weren't even human was unacceptable. According to Barbara, she hadn't received any money for 3 months and lived day by day. When I found her, she was severely weakened and in a dangerous state. Fortunately, over the past 3 days, I cleaned the filthy house and cooked nutritious meals for Barbara, helping her regain some strength. Although she couldn't exercise yet, she had recovered enough to move around a bit. "Welcome home, Dad, Mum," Barbara said with a smile as the living room door opened and my son and his wife walked in. They looked around suspiciously, noticing the unusually clean house and my presence. Jennifer turned pale and panicked. "What's going on? Why is mother-in-law here?" They must have forgotten that they gave me a spare key when they moved in. They probably intended to dump chores on me back then. However, either they changed their minds or found Barbara more useful than expected. They never asked me for help. Instead, Barbara was burdened with all the household chores, making every day difficult for her. Not understanding why I was in the house, they were in a frantic state. As I chuckled at their confusion, Jennifer, looking embarrassed, spoke up. "Mother-in-law, you're here." "Oh, should I get you some tea? We just brought back some souvenirs. I know you don't travel much, so we got some delicious treats." Jennifer hurried to the kitchen. But not being used to doing chores, she didn't know where the dishes were, clattering through the cupboards noisily. When she finally found the right dishes, she fumbled and dropped them. "Jennifer, are you okay? There's no need to rush just because I'm here. We're family, right?" I asked, and Jennifer returned with a forced smile. Haha. She had a small cut on her hand from the broken dish, but it wasn't serious, so I decided to leave it be. "Mom, why are you here? If you had told us you were coming, we would have come back earlier. You cleaned the house, didn't you?" "Really, if you had told us, we would have cleaned up. The house must have been a mess, right? I'm sorry, I'm terrible at chores. Jennifer is a bit clumsy, so Barbara has been helping with the housework. She's really a great daughter." "Oh, Jennifer, do you want a souvenir?" Daniel said, taking out a rather unattractive keychain from the souvenirs. They probably bought it intending to give it to someone else or use it themselves. Given how they treated Barbara, I found it hard to believe they bought her anything while on their trip. Barbara sighed as she took the keychain and tossed it into the trash. "Dad, your taste is awful. I don't want this." Barbara laughed, mocking her parents. And her smile was perfect to me. Daniel, enraged by her attitude, shouted, "What? How dare you mock your father? You've always been like this. No wonder we didn't want to take you on the trip." His loud voice startled me, but Barbara didn't seem to care. She retorted boldly, "Father, who are you talking about? Do you mean the people who left their precious child alone for 3 months to go on a trip? I don't consider such people my parents." Her words left my son and his wife speechless. According to Barbara, she had always obediently accepted their unreasonable demands without any resistance. It was probably the first time my son and his wife had heard such harsh words from Barbara. They were used to her quietly obeying, so they couldn't understand what was happening. Barbara laughed, mocking them. Jennifer, irritated by Barbara's attitude, shouted, "Enough already. Do you think you can get away with treating us like this? Who do you think raised you? You wouldn't survive without us. Stop being so disrespectful. Jennifer raised her hand. Sensing she couldn't dodge it, Barbara closed her eyes. This was unacceptable. I quickly stepped forward, grabbed Jennifer's hand, and glared at her. What do you think you're doing to a child? As a parent and an adult, this is disgraceful. Apologize to Barbara. She endured so much every day, hoping you'd finally notice her. And yet, you haven't even apologized to her once. That's inexcusable as a human being. Mother-in-law, stay out of this. I'm just trying to discipline my daughter properly. That's normal, right? Jennifer's face turned even redder with anger as she snapped back at me. It's true that if a child does something wrong, it's a parent's duty to correct and discipline them. But my son and his wife had failed completely as parents. Before scolding or denying, they needed to acknowledge and love their daughter. Skipping that crucial first step and treating Barbara like a convenient tool for their own needs was absolutely unforgivable. I had to say something to wake them up. Just as I thought this, Daniel stepped forward and began to speak selfishly. Mom, stop criticizing how we raise our child. We're doing our best. It's already stressful enough living with a child like Barbara. Don't push us any further. Daniel's eyes lacked their usual light-heartedness, and his voice was cold, sending a shiver down my spine. Where did I go wrong in raising him? How did he grow up to be a person who doesn't care about others? My son and his wife were inadequate as both parents and human beings. No matter how much I scolded them, my words never seemed to reach them, nor did they try to understand. What could I do to make them genuinely reflect on their failures as parents to Barbara? As I pondered, Barbara spoke in a heavy voice. I realized that being born to you two has made me very unhappy. Her words made us all widen our eyes. Barbara continued, seemingly unaffected by our reactions. Mom never bought clothes for me. I always had to wear her hand-me-downs, and my friends laughed at me. Dad never played with me. I was so envious of my friends who spent Sundays with their dads. I kept wondering what I did wrong and how I could fix it. Tears welled up in Barbara's eyes. But I was the same. Through my tear-blurred vision, I could still see Barbara's tearful smile. But Grandma told me I wasn't at fault. It was all Dad and Mom's fault. No, Barbara, we were thinking of you. Jennifer, overwhelmed by Barbara's words, reached out to her. But Barbara brushed Jennifer's hand away. Don't touch me. You are not my parents. My only family is Grandma. Jennifer collapsed in tears, devastated by Barbara's words. Daniel stood there, speechless and stunned. Grandma, let's go home. You're taking me to your house, right? Barbara said, tugging on my arm. As planned, we returned to my house together. After that, my son and his wife divorced. After the incident with Barbara, their relationship deteriorated to the point where they could no longer continue their marriage. There was a lot of conflict over Barbara's custody, but in the end, it was decided that I would take her in and raise her. Daniel frequently contacts me, saying he wants to see Barbara, but since she refuses, he has never seen her face. Jennifer tried to return to her parents' house, but I'd already informed them of what my son and his wife had done, so they refused to take her in. Now, Jennifer lives alone, completely isolated. As for me, Barbara and I live modestly together. Fortunately, my late husband left us with ample assets, so I can take care of Barbara without any issues until she is ready to leave the nest. For this reason, I must stay healthy. If possible, I want to stay by Barbara's side as a second mother until she becomes an adult, gets a job, and finds someone she can build a life with. Therefore, I will take care of my health and do my best